Great, thank you, Premier. It's a pleasure to be here at my third CoinSummit. Boy, Bitcoin's come a long way in the last 12 months. So we're here to talk about the state of Bitcoin. So earlier this year, CoinDesk released its first state of Bitcoin, which has generated about 130,000 views on SlideShare. We were very happy with that. We released a quarterly update a few months ago, and now this is our second quarter update, which we're releasing today. It'll be available for free download online at CoinDesk.com at about 11 a.m., I believe. So the state of Bitcoin. First, I hope all of you just briefly know of CoinDesk. It's the leading provider of news, price information. Our Bitcoin price index is widely cited, and information about Bitcoin. We have a global team of news personnel around the world. So here's the structure of the State of Bitcoin report. We're going to talk a little bit about price, the media landscape, the ecosystem and VC investment landscape, commerce, what's happening with Bitcoin commerce, the technology side, and then regulation and the macroeconomic picture. We're just going to highlight a few slides from each of these sections today because we don't have time to go through the full report. I do encourage you to download it for free at CoinDesk.com later today. So first, price and valuation. So Professor Susan Athey at Stanford says there's been too much focus on Bitcoin's price. And what's interesting, if we look at the top 10 stories that were read on CoinDesk.com over the last quarter, at least 4 of them actually were price related. A fifth, the failed prediction of Mark T. Williams for a Bitcoin price implosion in Q2 is arguably also price related. So clearly there's quite a bit of interest in what's happening with Bitcoin's price action. And Q2 was a very good quarter for Bitcoin. Things started off a little sour. But actually, Bitcoin's price is up 40% since the end of Q1. It's still about 16% below where it started the year at and hasn't reached its all-time high again. But it's actually rebounded quite nicely in Q2, up 40%. And the low point seemed to have come basically right around the 11th of April. There was a lot of rumors in China about possible exchanges getting shut down, banking licenses being revoked, and an official from the People's Bank of China came out on the 11th of April and said, China's not going to be banning Bitcoin. That appears to have kind of marked the bottom of the downward trend we were seeing. And then since, we've seen a lot of positive commercial news, Apple, Expedia, others, and of course the U.S. Marshals, possibly for the first time in history, made economic policy for the United States by selling Bitcoins. Usually they don't sell things that are illegal. So at the federal level, it looks like Bitcoin might be legalized, and we've seen the price respond positively since then. So one of the reasons we titled this the State of Bitcoin report rather than the State of Cryptocurrencies is that we felt that Bitcoin was really the big enchilada, and that's really continued to be the case. At the start of the year, Bitcoin had about 80% of the total market cap of cryptocurrencies. There's some 200 or so cryptocurrencies out there. That's actually grown. Bitcoin's share of that has grown up to 93%. So even though the price has come down, its share of the cryptocurrency pie has actually increased. And if you look at Litecoin, for example, Litecoin was about 18 times smaller than Bitcoin a few months ago. It's now 35 times smaller. So Bitcoin's really outpacing the number 2 cryptocurrency by a significant margin. So at the last CoinSummit in March, one of the questions that came up was which type of fees could Bitcoin potentially displace? I believe it was on the Mark Andreessen panel. And Gil Luria at Wedbush Securities and I decided to go through and actually start delineating which fees Bitcoin could potentially impact. Payment processing, title insurance, collections, there's a whole bunch of these. And if you look at the sections of the US economy, and this is just the US, that these fees and trust-based services touch, you're talking about a slice of the US economy that is worth $3.4 trillion. About 21% of the US economy is potentially impacted by Bitcoin. So a huge, huge potential impact in terms of economic value. On the market capitalization slide, we've shown this slide before. We've added in a few sectors, some of these trust-based sectors like the trust escrow sector and the securities exchanges. And you're looking at, and again, this is primarily a North American view here, but you're looking at about $550 billion of publicly traded market cap that's potentially impacted by Bitcoin technology. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the media landscape for Bitcoin. So we're seeing mainstream media attention and interest in Bitcoin remain. The Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, The Guardian and others are still really actively covering Bitcoin. So this is something that hasn't really fallen off the radar screen You know, it's not like the media just shows up for Mt. Gox and other kind of big events. They're actually still actively covering the sector. Wikipedia views are also another really interesting metric to look at. Bitcoin is the 89th most trafficked page on Wikipedia. There are about 900,000 views over the last 90 days. And in the kind of public intellectual sphere, I've got three Harvard leading thinkers here. We're seeing somewhat of an evolution, I think, in the comments that are coming from, you know, some of the people who have the public microphone. So Ken Rogoff, former chief economist of the IMF, author of This Time is Different with Carmen Reinhart, he was a little more bearish on Bitcoin's ability to become a currency. But Larry Summers, who was very close to becoming the next Federal Reserve Chairman, my doctoral thesis advisor, Neil Ferguson, they're starting to look at Bitcoin more broadly from a technology perspective and seeing that this isn't just a currency. This is a very transformative technology that transcends simply a monetary analysis. So if we shift to the kind of Bitcoin ecosystem and venture capital environment, quarter one of 2014 was a very good quarter for Bitcoin, $57 million invested in startups. But actually Q2 is even better. $73 million has been invested, and that's not including the $20 million deal that was announced here early in Q3. So about a 28% increase over the first quarter. And that totals actually, the all-time quantity of money invested in startups is actually $240 million if you factor in Zappos' $20 million deal, 150 of which has come here just in 2014 alone. So one of the slides in our last State of Bitcoin report that generated quite a bit of attention was this comparison we did between the early internet. 1995 is the earliest year we have investment data for venture capital investments in internet startups, and Bitcoin in 2014. Mark Andreessen said that Bitcoin reminds him of the internet in 1993, so the comparison's not, you know, completely perfect in that regard. But if you actually annualize the current 2014 venture capital investment, and what we're projecting is $284 million to be invested in 2014, that's actually higher than the early stage financing investment that was made in 1995 internet companies. These numbers haven't been adjusted for inflation. We haven't done any adjustments for the difference in costs of starting a company between now and then. But it's still, I think, a very interesting comparison to show that the VCs are really walking the talk and putting their money where their mouth is in terms of backing Bitcoin companies to the degree they back the early internet. There have actually been 8 companies in total that have raised $10 million or more. Zappos is the leader with 40 million. BitPay is not far behind with a little over 30 million. And a total of 22 startups that have at least $1 million in capital raised. And if your company has raised $1 million or more and you don't see your name up here, please get in touch. We do want to keep track of the full universe of Bitcoin-backed startups. So now looking at the geographic spread here, North America is still a very dominant place for investment. 78% of all dollars are going to North American companies. But interestingly, Europe actually has passed Asia in the last quarter. The Bitfury investment actually, I think, had a big part of that. And South America is now on the map for the first time. So we're starting to see kind of a broadening of Bitcoin investment out of North America and into other areas of the world. If we look at individual countries, the United States, not surprising, 77% of all dollars, 59% of the number of companies even are based in the US. But again, we're seeing new countries coming online. Mexico, Holland, Argentina all got their first Bitcoin or VC-backed Bitcoin company in Q2. So we're a broadening of the investment landscape. Now, last year at CoinSummit, I asked on the panel, where is the future home of Bitcoin going to be? Where is kind of the center? And if you look at Silicon Valley versus the rest of the world, you can see that Silicon Valley is taking 48% of the dollars, and about a third of the companies are actually based there. So Silicon Valley is still a very dominant, I think, place for Bitcoin, but it's not 75% or the whole story by any means. So this is how we view the Bitcoin industry in terms of different sectors. We think there are really 6 distinct sectors in the Bitcoin economy. You have pure play companies like your wallets, your exchanges, your payment processors, and those companies, I think, don't need much explanation. Mining includes both mining manufacturers and also cloud mining. The two categories that do need a little more explanation are financial services, and then the one we have in the center there called Universal, which we'll talk about in depth in a little more in just a moment. Financial services Bitcoin companies include everything from ATM manufacturers to gift cards to analytics and news firms like CoinDesk. The universal companies are the ones actually that are doing a bunch of these different things. They're a wallet, they're a payment processor, they may be deploying ATMs. We'll again talk about them more in just a second. The universal companies are commanding the most VC investment. 25% of the dollars are going to them, but they've slipped a bit. Wallets, payment processors, mining, and financial services all saw significant investment in Q2. The only categories that actually didn't see significant investment in Q2 were universals and the exchanges. But the pie is starting to become more evenly distributed across these 6 categories. Now this category universal, we have companies like CoinPlug, Circle, Coinbase in here. Again, these are companies that are looking to do more than one aspect of kind of the Bitcoin value chain. They're really trying to, I think, take advantage of 2 key features of financial services. One is efficiency, the ability to to have your customer relationship for your exchange, your wallet, all in one place, and also trust. I trust you to store my Bitcoins. I'm also going to trust you to do my payment processing. I'm going to trust your ATM. CoinPlug is a good example of this. They're deploying ATMs, as I mentioned, as well as doing processing and providing a wallet. And we think this very well could be an important trend or development in Bitcoin. So we think a lot of companies will start pursuing the universal model or merge into universals or risk fading away. Trust is a very important element, I think, in financial services, and having that trusted brand along with the efficiency is something that I think customers are going to want. So looking at Bitcoin commerce, some really important things happened in Q2 in terms of building services and apps that will enable trust and make Bitcoin easier to use. Circle, of course, launched an insured wallet. Insurance is a product that I think consumers have come to expect in other financial services, and it's, I think, a very positive thing for Bitcoin to see that. I think that will give a lot of consumers comfort as they experiment with Bitcoin for the first time. Zappo's debit card was derided in some circles as kind of a step back. Here, Bitcoin is supposed to be all digital. Why do we need some kind of physical card? But again, this is something that consumers are used to using, and it's a bridge to maybe going completely digital. And I think that's a positive thing in terms of consumer adoption. And then I mentioned BitReserve. They've done something I think that's not just radical for Bitcoin, but potentially transformative across corporate America, the corporate world, as well as organizations all over the world. And that's a transparent balance sheet. So this would be a balance sheet basically that you can audit in real time to know what kind of reserves, what kind of assets BitReserve is holding. Are they in treasuries? Are they in something else more exotic? Think about the banking system in 2008. Where all we could see is at the end of the quarter when they've done some nice housekeeping, what the balance sheets look like. This is a complete game changer, I think, if they can pull it off. So think about a world in which balance sheets are actually auditable in real time. So for the first time, CoinDesk is going to be making some forecasts in our State of Bitcoin report. We didn't want to just be kind of like capturing kind of what had happened. We wanted to also be looking ahead. And here we have our forecast for the number of wallets we're expecting to be in existence by the end of 2014. There's a little bit over 5 million wallets right now currently in existence. We're expecting by the end of the year to be about 8 million wallets. And then on the merchant side, these names have already been mentioned. Dish, $14 billion company which is now accepting Bitcoin. Expedia, Newegg. We think there's at least 63,000 merchants based on Coinbase's and BitPay's numbers that are currently accepting Bitcoin. However, we did a random sample of the CoinMap data. CoinMap's a site that actually has a map of different Bitcoin companies. And it looks like about half of the companies on CoinMap are actually self-processing. So this number could be significantly understated. There could be well in excess of maybe 100,000 merchants that are actually accepting Bitcoin right now. And in terms of our merchant processing our merchant accepting forecast here, we're expecting about 100,000 merchants by the end of the year based on the BitPay and Coinbase numbers and trends to be accepting Bitcoin. CoinDesk.com, we're also tracking the ATM deployment. So this is a map of where Bitcoin ATMs are located. These are just coming on and ramping up. There's about 103 roughly around the world today. So briefly talk about some of the Bitcoin technology. So the number of GitHub updated repositories has been growing quite nicely. Chris Dixon, I think, wrote about this recently, the incredible power of having this very large developer base out there that's interested in building applications for Bitcoin. That's a huge, huge positive for Bitcoin's prospects. Right now, there's about 340 apps in the Apple App Store that are Bitcoin related, and about 250 in the Android store. So we're already seeing pretty large development work being done. So shifting to regulation and macro, our last section. The regulation story, I think, for Bitcoin is tempered a bit. I think things have slowed down a bit. We're still seeing some setbacks. Bolivia recently banned Bitcoin. It joined Iceland and Vietnam as I think the 3 countries that have actually outlawed Bitcoin. Not surprising in the case of Bolivia. They've been a serial kind of currency debaser. California, on the other hand, like New York State and other states in the US, is actually taking a more proactive and positive voice to actually legalize Bitcoin. But the regulatory picture continues to be a bit mixed. I think the big thing was that China seems to have stabilized in April, and that's been, I think, a real positive story for Bitcoin. And I think on the whole, regulation is trending positively for Bitcoin. This slide I've titled kind of Keeping Mt. Gox in Perspective. A lot of media attention was paid to the $500 million or so that were lost at Mt. Gox. But if you look at some of these stories coming out of the traditional financial services system, BNP Paribas, $9 billion fine. Just yesterday, I think Citibank agreed to a $7 billion settlement. JP Morgan earlier this year, $13 billion. I mean, that's $30 billion right there between those 3 companies. And the list just goes on and on in terms of like market manipulation and other fraud and malfeasance in the traditional financial services system. So, Gox and some of the other problems that Bitcoin has had, I think, is a real small drop in the bucket compared to what's going on with the big boys. At the same time, also, people always talk about, aren't you concerned that ISIS is using Bitcoin for illicit transactions? I mean, Bitcoin really pales as a medium for illegal activity compared to some of these other markets and cash, for example. So I think, again, that's something that gets blown way out of proportion in the media. So something we don't have in the State of Bitcoin report, but I just wanted to give you kind of a first look at, which will be coming out here very shortly, is what I'm calling my Bitcoin Market Opportunity Index. So we all like to think that countries like Argentina and China are really fertile ground for Bitcoin for a variety of reasons. But I haven't seen any analysis done which actually goes through in a quantitative fashion and actually ranks countries based on things like, what kind of technology capacity does the country have, what kind of smartphone adoption, what percentage of online commerce is taking place, what about financial repression, inflation, restrictions on capital controls. We're also looking at other socioeconomic factors, GDP growth, whether there's an entrepreneurial culture, a tech hub, what type of financial crisis have they had recently, if any? Was it a currency crisis? Was it a banking crisis, which may not have as a positive impact on Bitcoin adoption? So in a few days, I'll be releasing a ranking of countries based on their kind of the market opportunity for Bitcoin based on these variables. So just to wrap up, there's, I think, some 60 slides in the State of Bitcoin report. And we know that's a lot of information to go through. We've got a summary with the highlights right at the front of the report for you. And we've also, we're adding this dashboard as well, so you can get a quick snapshot of how Bitcoin's performing over time. This is what we think are the key Bitcoin adoption metrics. And you can see that, wallets, for example, are up 7x over the last 12 months. We'll probably add a column, I think, for quarter over quarter as well. But this and the summary are right up front in the State of Bitcoin report, which you can download for free at CoinDesk.com. And I thank you very much for your time. Look forward to a great conference.